what does it actually mean for a person to thrive? To really flourish, going beyond just, say, having money or holding power.
Yeah, it's a fundamental question.
And what if there was something like a science that could help us understand that, maybe even help us achieve it?
Well, that's pretty much what we're diving into today.
Exactly. We're looking at the science of human econo-abilities. It's this really cutting-edge study, apparently AI-driven, that gets deep into human potential.
And not just potential, but the forces shaping it, right?
Yeah.
And how we might maybe engineer a more sustainable future.
Right. So our mission here, for you listening, is to pull out the most important insights, the surprising bits, the connections from all this source material.
We want to guide you through these, let's face it, pretty complex ideas.
Yeah, so you walk away with a clearer sense of what really enables us to, be and do valuable things.
Yep.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it really is a fascinating journey.
It spans everything from ancient philosophy right up to the latest in AI simulation.
All chasing that big question about human flourishing.
It's ambitious stuff. And I think, first up, we really need to wrap our heads around this main term, Econo-Abilities.
Right. Sounds a bit technical.
It does, but it just stands for human economic capabilities.
Ah.
And crucially, it's not just about how much money you have in the bank.
Okay, so what is it about them?
It's really a deep look into the potential and also the realized capacities that allow people to flourish.
Flourish like growth, creativity.
Exactly. Growth, creativity, fulfillment, happiness, even self-actualization. And the key idea here is that this potential isn't fixed. It's something you can develop.
Through effort, right. Dedicated effort.
Precisely.
So it's less about what stuff you have and more about what you're genuinely capable of doing, what's actually possible for you. I like how this connects back, though.
How do you mean?
Well, you can hear echoes of older ideas, can't you? Like Aristotle, way back, talking about potentiality and actuality.
Sure, the idea that something exists in potential before it's made real.
And maybe more recently, the human potential movement in the 60s, influenced by people like Maslow.
Oh yeah, they absolutely believed in this huge, untapped potential in everyone. They were pushing back against systems they felt kind of diminished people.
So what's really interesting here is how this science we're looking at tries to, formalize this, put some rigor to it.
That's a good way to put it. It's applying analysis to that age-old question, what is a flourishing life, and how can we maybe systematically achieve it?
And how do they bridge that gap from philosophy to something measurable?
A big piece of it comes from the capability approach. That's the work of Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate economist and philosopher.
The Sen, right, I've heard the name.
His work shifts how we think about well-being.
Yeah.
Instead of just looking at resources like income or even subjective things like happiness,
focuses on
the actual freedom people have.
Yeah.
The freedom to achieve lives they have reason to value.
Freedom. Okay. And there's a key distinction here, isn't there? Between functionings and capabilities.
Absolutely. Critical distinction. Functionings are the actual states and activities like, are you well-nourished? Are you healthy? Things you are or do.
Okay, the realized outcomes.
Right. But capabilities are the set of options you realistically have, the genuine opportunities open to you.
The source had that great example, didn't it? About eating.
Yes, the two people not eating. One is starving, no capability to eat, no food available.
No choice.
No choice. The other is fasting, maybe for religious reasons. They could eat, they have the food, the capability, but they are choosing not to.
So their functioning not eating is the same at that moment.
Exactly. But their capabilities, their freedom to choose, are completely different. It really underscores why freedom matters so much in this framework.
And that distinction is vital, you're saying, because it gets past the limits of just looking at, say, GDP.
Totally. It lets you account for individual differences. Like someone with a disability might need way more resources to achieve the same mobility.
Right. Simple income doesn't capture that.
And it also tackles that tricky issue of adaptive preferences.
What's that again?
It's where people in really deprived situations might lower their expectations, say they're happy or content, even when they lack real opportunities.
So it masks the lack of freedom.
Precisely. The capability approach gives us a much richer, more ethically sound way to gauge real human development.
Okay, so if we want to measure this bigger idea, these econo-abilities, how do we do it if GDP isn't enough?
Well, the study points strongly towards the Human Development Index, the HDI.
HDI, yeah, that one I know. Used internationally.
Right, very recognized. It was co-created by Mahbub ul Haq, very much inspired by Sen's work, and its whole point was to shift the focus
away from just national income
towards people-centered policies. It looks at three core things:
Which are?
a long and healthy life measured by life expectancy, knowledge usually measured by schooling years, and a decent standard of living based on GNI per capita, gross national income.
Okay, those three pillars.
But then there's another layer, the inequality-adjusted HDI, or IHDI.
IHDI, so how does that work?
It takes the basic HDI score for a country and then discounts it based on how unequally those three things, health, education, income, are spread around.
Ah, so it factors in the inequality within the country?
Exactly. So you can think of the regular HDI as showing a country's potential human development, maybe its potential econo-abilities.
Right, the overall average.
But the IHDI gives you a clearer picture of the actualized development once you account for those disparities.
So for you listening, the gap between a country's HDI and its IHDI, that's really telling, isn't it?
It's a direct measure of the potential loss,
Yeah.
how much human development is being wasted, essentially because of inequality.
Wow, that's a powerful number. And the study pulls all this together, philosophy, economics, these metrics.
Yeah, that synthesizes them into this multidimensional framework. It even brings in a modern angle on ecological stewardship, very holistic.
That ecological part seems crucial. It brings us to the planet itself, right? The natural limits.
Absolutely. The study really hammers home the idea of the biophysical economy, meaning our human economy isn't separate. It's an open subsystem, completely embedded within the Earth's finite biosphere.
That's not just a nice phrase, is it? It's based on physics.
It is, rooted in thermodynamics. And the implication is huge.
Which is?
Perpetual quantitative economic growth, just growing bigger and bigger forever on a finite planet. It's a physical impossibility.
That really challenges the standard model, doesn't it?
Fundamentally, from this perspective, real wealth comes directly from nature, from natural capital. So the ultimate ceiling on our econo-abilities isn't just finance or tech.
It's the environment's carrying capacity and energy.
Exactly. The planet is the ultimate banker for our potential. We have to live within its means.
Okay, so we have these fundamental natural limits. What about our own nature, our biology, genetics?
That's another huge piece. Behavioral genetics, looking at twins, adoptions. These studies consistently show genetics plays a significant role.
In what kind of traits?
Things very relevant to development. Intelligence, IQ, shows substantial heritability, like 57 to over 80% in adults. And it seems to increase with age.
Increase with age. That's counterintuitive.
It is. But the thinking is that as we get older, we have more freedom to select environments that match our genetic predispositions, which amplifies their effect.
Interesting. What else?
Personality traits, too, like extroversion, conscientiousness, even specific economic behaviors show a genetic link.
Like what?
Things like whether people participate in the stock market, about 33% heritable, or savings rates, around 35% heritable.
Wow. But it's crucial to clarify, right? Heritability is about populations, not individuals.
Absolutely critical point. It describes how much of the variation we see in a trait across a population is down to genetic differences. It does not mean, say, 50% of your IQ is fixed to genes.
So it suggests maybe a genetic first draft, but not destiny.
Exactly. It's a predisposition. And this is where it gets really dynamic with epigenetic.
Epigenetics. Okay, this is where genes and environment interact.
Precisely. Genes set that range of reaction, the potential, but the environment determines where you actually end up within that range.
And epigenetics is the mechanism.
It's the molecular mechanism. Think of chemical marks on or around your DNA. They act like switches, turning genes on or off based on life experiences.
Without changing the DNA code itself?
Right, the underlying sequence stays the same, but the gene expression changes.
So the environment literally gets under the skin, as they say.
That's exactly the phrase. The study mentions those famous rat studies.
With maternal care.
Yeah, how different levels of licking and grooming by mother rats epigenetically programmed the stress response systems in their pups for life.
And chillingly, they found similar marks in humans.
Similar epigenetic marks were found in the brains of human suicide victims who had suffered severe childhood abuse, a stark link.
And the Dutch hunger winter example, too.
Another powerful one. Prenatal exposure to famine during WBII was linked decades later to higher rates of health problems, like cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and specific changes in DNA methylation patterns in the offspring.
So this raises a really profound question, doesn't it?
It does.
If things like poverty or chronic stress or poor nutrition aren't just social issues but can be physically written onto our genome via epigenetics.
Potentially creating these vicious cycles across generations.
What does that mean for how we tackle things like intergenerational disadvantage? It's not just about policy, it's biology too.
It points to a deep physical link between our social world and our biological potential. It's quite sobering.
Okay, so beyond those natural foundations of the planet, our genes, the study, highlights another universal driver: scarcity.
Yes, scarcity. Lack of money, lack of time, even lack of food. It doesn't just affect our circumstances.
It affects our minds, right, our thinking.
Profoundly. It consumes what researchers call mental bandwidth. It creates a specific scarcity mindset.
And this mindset leads to tunneling.
Exactly. Your focus narrows right down onto the immediate problem of managing that scarce resource, which can be efficient for that one thing right now.
But it comes at a cost.
A huge cognitive cost. It crowds out long-term planning, impulse control, complex problem solving.
And that finding from Princeton and Harvard is just incredible.
The IQ drop.
Yeah, just thinking about a financial worry can temporarily drop your measured IQ by 13 or 14 points.
Which is comparable to losing a full night's sleep.
Yeah.
Or the cognitive gap between chronic poverty and financial stability. It's massive.
And this tunneling can trap people, right?
Yeah.
Leading to poor decisions that just make the scarcity worse.
It creates a self-perpetuating scarcity trap. And it totally reframes how we should view poverty, not as some kind of moral failing,
but as a cognitive burden, a literal tax on mental resources.
which directly impacts those econo-abilities we talked about.
And this scarcity dynamic, it plays out on the grand scale of history, too.
Absolutely. You have the classic Malthusian perspective.
Population grows faster than resources, leading to checks like famine, disease, war.
Right. And we see historical examples, maybe the Maya or Easter Island, where resource overexploitation seems linked to collapse,
But then there's the flip side, the cornucopian view.
which argues scarcity is the mother of invention. It drives ingenuity, technological leaps. Think of the Green Revolution massively increasing food production.
So scarcity isn't just bad, it's also a driver.
It's arguably the fundamental selective pressure in human history. It forces this constant race between collapse and innovation.
And faced with scarcity, societies basically have two options: cooperate or compete.
That's the fundamental strategic choice. Competition over scarce resources often fuels conflict. That's realistic conflict theory.
But scarcity can also push us together.
Paradoxically, yes. Shared threats, like managing a river everyone depends on or tackling climate change, can force cooperation.
Okay, connecting this back, it helps explain something uncomfortable, doesn't it? Why humans seem prone to us versus them.
It does. Why do we form in-groups and out-groups, sometimes breaking our own rules or even trying to dominate other groups?
It seems linked to this scarcity dynamic.
Social identity theory helps unpack this. We naturally categorize into us and them, and often derive self-esteem from our us.
And this has evolutionary roots.
Likely. In ancient environments where resources were scarce, favoring your own group and being wary of others was probably adaptive for survival.
But today, that ancient tribal psychology can get activated.
And lead to prejudice, stereotypes, discrimination, even violence against perceived competitors or threats. Still very much with us.
So if nature gives us the raw material and scarcity shapes our basic responses, then it's the human-made stuff, the social architecture, that really channels how econo-abilities develop and get distributed.
Precisely. The study looks hard at social stratification, how societies are layered, and it brings in Max Weber's idea of life chances.
Life chances mean
The probabilities you have of achieving good outcomes, health, education, economic success, based on where you start in that social hierarchy.
And social mobility, moving up or down that ladder, seems to be getting harder in many places.
Yes, it's slowed in many developed nations. And a key reason for this stickiness is intergenerational wealth.
Not just inheriting money.
Right, not just money.
Yeah.
It's also the less tangible stuff. Knowledge, values, social connections, cultural capital passed down through families.
And the scale of this is huge. The source mentioned a U.S. statistic.
Clark statistic. Top 10% holding nearly 75% of the wealth. A lot of that reflects these intergenerational transfers, tangible and intangible.
So you get this powerful interaction, the law of nature, our predispositions,
Colliding with the law of man, our social structure.
it's creating this engine driving persistent inequality.
Which brings us to why people sometimes break the rules of these structures. Why deviance happens.
Sociological theories have explanations for this.
Several. Strain theory from Robert Merton is a classic.
Strain theory.
It suggests deviance arises from a mismatch. Society pushes certain goals, like financial success.
American dream, maybe?
Right. But it doesn't provide everyone with legitimate means to achieve them. That strain can lead some to find alternative, deviant means.
And then there's labeling theory.
Howard Becker. This focuses less on the act, more on the reaction. Being labeled deviant by society can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. People start to live up to the label.
And this links back to our own biases, right? Confirmation bias favoring people like us.
Absolutely. These cognitive shortcuts, when applied socially, can fuel prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination. Scapegoating theory fits here too, blaming an outgroup for society's problems.
So deciding how to build this social architecture, it's fundamentally a moral exercise, isn't it?
Deeply moral. It reflects our values about justice, fairness, what a good society looks like.
And this is where it gets really fundamental for you, the listener, because these underlying moral frameworks, they explain so many of our current debates.
That's right. The study brings in moral foundations theory, Jonathan Haidt's work.
Hate. Okay.
He argues we have these innate moral intuitions, like building blocks, care harm, fairness cheating, loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, sanctity degradation, 5 main ones.
And different groups emphasize these differently, leading to political divides.
That's the idea. For example, liberals tend to heavily prioritize care and fairness equality, while conservatives often give more equal weight to all 5 foundations, including loyalty, authority, and sanctity.
Fascinating. And these intuitions then get built into formal philosophies about how stuff should be distributed.
Exactly. Philosophies of distributive justice offer competing answers. You have utilitarianism, greatest good for the greatest number. Often supports redistribution because of diminishing marginal utility.
Meaning a dollar means more to someone poor than someone rich.
Right. Then there's John Rawls' justice as fairness.
The veil of ignorance idea.
Exactly. Design society without knowing your place in it. Leads to prioritizing equal basic liberties and making sure inequalities benefit the least well-off. The difference principle.
Contrasting sharply with Nozick.
Robert Nozick's entitlement theory focuses entirely on the process. Was property acquired justly, transferred justly? If yes, the outcome is just, regardless of inequality. He saw redistribution like forced labor.
And finally, virtue ethics. Back to Aristotle.
Yes, shifting focus to the character of people and institutions. Using resources and structures to promote eudaimonia, that deep flourishing for everyone involved.
So the takeaway isn't that there's one right human culture.
No, it's that this is a deeply contested space. The rules of the game reflect these fundamental clashes in our moral visions.
Okay, so how does the study propose we navigate all this complexity? Genes, environments, scarcity, social structures, morality. It seems overwhelming. This is where the AI comes in.
This is exactly where the AI-driven vision becomes powerful. They use complexity economics and agent-based modeling, or ABM.
Agent-based modeling, explain that a bit.
It's a computational technique. Think of it as building a digital twin of a society.
A digital twin, like a simulation.
Exactly. But bottom up. You create digital agents representing individuals or households, give them diverse characteristics and rules for behavior based on psychology, sociology, economics.
And they interact.
They interact with each other and with a simulated environment, maybe one with resource limits. It moves beyond the simplistic average person assumptions in older models.
So this lets you build a virtual lab to run experiments you could never do in real life.
That's the power of it. ABM handles complexity well. Behavioral realism, individual differences, environmental constraints, policy rules like taxes or benefits. It's suited for this kind of messy real-world problem.
And you can use it to test different policies, see what happens long term.
Precisely. Simulate things like universal basic income versus targeted welfare, or big investments in education versus tax cuts, or different climate policies.
And what kind of results do you get out?
You track metrics over time, inequality using the Gini coefficient maybe, well-being like average HDI and IHDI, economic output, GDP, sustainability indicators, resource use, emissions, even social cohesion measures.
And the study shared some illustrative results. What did they suggest?
The simulations highlighted trade-offs with single-focus policies, like aggressive redistribution might slow GDP growth. Pure growth focus might worsen inequality and wreck the environment. No silver bullet.
But an integrated approach.
An integrated approach seemed most promising in their illustrative runs. Something combining, say, a moderate UBI, significant public investment in education and healthcare, and strong environmental policy like a carbon tax.
So, synergy, doing several things together, worked best.
It seemed to produce the most balanced outcome. Better well-being, more social cohesion, moderate growth, but kept within ecological limits, more sustainable flourishing.
Okay, so if that's the kind of integrated policy needed, what kind of leader can actually manage that complexity?
Ah, the leadership question. The study talks about the need for a guardian steward.
Guardian Stewart. Sounds Platonic, like the philosopher king.
It definitely echoes Plato's ideal leadership based on wisdom, expertise, virtue, focused on the community's good, but updated for today.
So what does a modern Guardian Stewart look like?
Someone capable of systems thinking, understanding interconnectedness, ethically grounded, committed to expanding those econo-abilities for everyone, especially the least advantaged, while respecting planetary boundaries.
And how would you even select such leaders? What criteria?
The study suggests prioritizing things like systems thinking and complexity literacy, seeing the whole picture, ethical reasoning, data-driven decision-making, and crucially, a long-term orientation, thinking about future generations. Intergenerational equity.
That sounds like a very different kind of politician than we often see.
It might require a shift, and the study argues that cultivating these leaders needs a fundamental change in education, moving towards education for sustainable development, or ESD.
ESD, teaching systems thinking, ethics, ecology from early on.
Exactly. Not just facts, but how to think critically and ethically about complex, interconnected global challenges.
So pulling it all together, this massive deep dive from Aristotle to AI, it leads to some concrete recommendations for achieving this global eudaimonia.
Yes, a set of integrated recommendations. At the individual and community level. First, reinventing education along those ESD lines we just discussed.
Critical thinking, empathy, ecological understanding.
Right. Second, actively working to counter that scarcity mindset.
Which means financial literacy, growth mindset, but also structural change.
Crucially, yes. Policies like a strong social safety net, maybe universal basic income, to reduce that constant financial pressure, freeing up mental bandwidth for better choices.
And rebuilding community ties.
Rebuilding social capital, both the strong bonding ties within groups and the bridging ties that connect different groups. That's key to counteracting the US versus them tendency.
Okay, that's individuals and communities. What about national and global systems?
Big shifts needed there too. Adopting an ecological economics paradigm. Moving beyond just GDP growth to focus on sustainable well-being, using dashboards of indicators like the IHDI.
Living within planetary boundaries becomes the goal.
Absolutely. Sustainable scale, fair distribution, efficient allocation, those become the guiding principles, and transitioning rapidly to a circular economy.
Designing out waste, keeping materials circulating, regenerating nature.
Exactly. Plus, prioritizing innovation for basic needs, sustainable food, clean energy, accessible healthcare.
And again, the emphasis is on an integrated policy package.
Yes, reinforcing the simulation findings. The best path likely involves combining a strong social safety net, massive public investment in universal access to quality education and healthcare, and serious environmental governance, carbon pricing, circular economy rules. It all has to work together.
Finally, what about AI itself and other future tech?
A huge factor. The vision is for AI as a collaborative partner, boosting human creativity, problem solving, even ethical judgment. But that requires huge investment in upskilling people.
But there's a warning, too, about enhancement technologies.
A serious one. Things like CRISPR gene editing or advanced brain-computer interfaces aimed at enhancing humans, they carry enormous risks.
Risks like creating a biological divide.
Exactly. Exacerbating inequality to an unprecedented degree, creating potentially a permanent biological class system, and raising fundamental questions about human identity.
So the final call is for careful governance.
Urgent need for proactive ethical governance. Don't just leave it to the market. The guiding principle has to be expanding econo-abilities for everyone, making sure these powerful tools benefit the least advantaged most, echoing Rawls.
So really, this whole deep dive, spanning millennia of thought and peering into the future with AI, it boils down to a kind of science of management.
You could absolutely frame it that way. It's about how we strategically manage this incredibly complex dance between our enduring human nature, our rapidly evolving capabilities, and our deepest moral hopes for justice and flourishing for all.
What an incredible sweep. We've gone from ancient Greece to AI labs, all trying to help you understand these deep levers that shape human potential. So thinking about everything we've covered, especially that cognitive load from the scarcity mindset, and how new tech could lift us up or pull us apart, maybe ask yourself, what steps could you take, even small ones, to free up your own mental bandwidth? And how might you contribute in your own way to building a society where everyone has the genuine freedom, the real capability to pursue a truly flourishing life?
Lots to reflect on there.
Definitely. We hope exploring these connections gives you some food for thought, maybe informs some choices, or even sparks some action in your own community.
This is DigitView.